Hi, I'm Dan, this is At Midlife Crisis Motorcyclist, and today I've reached another milestone in my admittedly brief riding career to date. Yes, I got my first go on a Ducati. And yeah, being a bit of a rookie and all that, I thought it was probably best to start with something, not too big, not too full on, not too intimidating, just to kind of ease myself into the whole Ducati thing. So here I am with a Multistrada V4 Rally, all 170 horsepower and, in this case, 28 grand's worth of it. Yeah, that worked out, didn't it? Anyway, while there are of course many brilliant motorcycle manufacturers out there, nobody quite nails that whole kind of midlife crisis motorcyclist thing like Ducati. Their bikes, they channel that whole kind of exotic Italian thing. They manage to appear both exclusive and yet ubiquitous amongst certain circles of riders. And it feels like once you hit a certain stage in your riding career, the choice is either one of these or a BMW GS. Anyway, lazy stereotyping aside, I'm trying to get my head around the whole Multistrada thing. And, well, it's quite complicated, isn't it? So, as much for my own benefit as much as anybody else's, because I expect anyone watching this probably knows the bike very well, I'm just going to talk through where this Rally fits into the range. Now, you can still get a two-cylinder version of the Multistrada based around the previous generation, but this is part of the V4 generation, which launched, I think, in 2020, maybe for the 2021 model year. Anyway, it's been around a little while now, but it's really moved the Multistrada's game onto a whole new dimension. 170 horsepower means it's way more powerful and faster than something like a BMW GS or pretty much anything else in the market, and definitely puts the Ducati at the kind of aggressive, sporty end of this whole kind of premium adventure bike sector. Now, the Multistrada V4 range starts off with the regular V4, which has passive suspension, and then you can go up to the V4S, which adds active suspension, quick shifter, a load of other techie bits, a bigger TFT screen, stuff like that. The Rally that you see here is basically a V4S, but with a bigger 30-litre fuel tank. It's got longer travel suspension, 200mm rather than 170mm, and these wire wheels that you see here. Pricing starts at just shy of £24,000, but the one you see here with what they call the full adventure pack, which is the panniers, all the radar bits and bobs, loads of other nice additions, that's closer to 28 grand. Ouch. If that's not enough, you can also get a Multistrada with a smaller front wheel, a 17-inch front wheel rather than the 19 of the rest of the range for a kind of sporty feel. That's the Pikes Peak. Or if that's not enough, you can get the RS, which is basically the same as that, but with a full-on Panigale engine, 180 horsepower and a load of other trick bits. Confused? Yeah, me too. And then of course there's the Desert X, which is like the full-on off-road adventure bike version, which is based around the two-cylinder engine and is built for if you really want to get out in the wilds. Suffice to say, there is a Multistrada or a version of the Multistrada for pretty much every motorcycling need you could imagine, which is all very impressive, but I have to confess, I am struggling to generally find the love for this whole format of bike, which I realise puts me in a minority of one because everybody else seems to absolutely love them. But first up, just look at it. I mean, I'm struggling to call it beautiful. It's very impressive, no doubt about that, but it just seems so kind of tall and imposing, which I guess is part of the point for the people who like the bikes. But my first impressions of it so far is it just feels really heavy, really cumbersome, really quite intimidating in kind of low speed situations in particular. There is on the active suspension what they call a minimum preload setting, which supposedly drops it down a little bit and makes it a little more friendly. There's also various low seat options as well, but there's no getting away from the fact that this is a big old unit to be threading through traffic. It's probably a bit too glitzy and expensive to be razzing around off-road, kind of begging the question, what's the point? To me, really, bikes like this feel like the two-wheeled equivalent of kind of performance SUVs, and I don't really like them either. But what do I know? People absolutely love them and seem to think that this is all the motorcycle you'd ever need, given it has the performance of a superbike and all the practicality and usefulness of an adventure bike. So, in an attempt to confront my prejudices, I'm going to ride this to Scotland, probably going to get wet in the process, but we'll see what I learn along the way. Hopefully, it will also give me the opportunity to finally answer that burning question which has always completely mystified me, namely, exactly what the hell is it that riders of bikes like this carry around in these giant aluminium panniers that hang off the side? Okay, so welcome to the Ducati Multistrada V4 Rally and a slightly nervous midlife crisis motorcyclist getting to grips with what is a bit of a beast of a bike. There's no getting away from that. Now, I've already laid out the case for the prosecution, why I'm not necessarily sold on the idea of these kind of big glitzy premium high performance adventure bikes. As I've said, there's the looks of the thing. It could be the best riding bike in the world, but I still don't think it's a pretty one. And then there's the intimidation factor of what it's like in kind of more everyday situations. So, you know, I'm 6 foot, so I'm not small, but the seat just feels very tall. I'm just on the balls of my feet, and with that big 30-litre tank up top, feels very, very top heavy, very cumbersome. And when you're in kind of, you know, just manoeuvring around or trying to weave through traffic or whatever, it just feels like such a lump of a bike. And just, I'll be honest, I just feel like it's going to fall over on me all the time, which is obviously embarrassing any time, but on a bike as glitzy and as lovely as this, you know, a really expensive premium Ducati. If you want to brighten everyone's day, drop your Multistrada. I'm sure everyone is going to feel very amused at the idea of that happening. So what I've been kind of pottering around, I've constantly had that fear and a couple of wobbles, and it's put the fear of God into me, to be honest. And now we're out onto the open road, although it feels a lot more comfortable being on it now. You know, like all big adventure bikes, once you're up and running, the size becomes less of an issue, but the intimidation becomes different because there are 170 reasons to be nervous of this bike now in terms of the horsepower output. That is by some margin the most powerful bike I've ridden so far. And when you combine that with something as big as this that weighs, say, 260 kilos, it's a lot to take in. And there's a lot of complexity as well. I mean, one thing that is good is there's an awful lot of electronic gizmos geared to, well, keeping it upright. Whether that's multi-level wheelie control, adjustable suspension, the active suspension, cornering ABS, cornering traction, loads of kind of stuff that Ducati has honed on its super bikes and its racing bikes and things like that is now here on this adventure bike. So it's looking after you, but in its way that's also intimidating because there's so much to take in. You know, what mode do you go for? How do you customize all those different rider modes? What setting of rebound and preload do you go for? And I guess that's the kind of thing, when you own a bike like this, you'll come to appreciate more than when you're on just a, you know, a test ride like this, an extended one as it may be. But you know, it's when you live with a bike and you can kind of configure it to the way you want to ride, where you're riding, how many people you're carrying, the luggage, all that kind of thing. So I will accept that that's probably something that you come to appreciate more as an owner than as a tester. So yeah, it's happier out here in the wilds, but it's still quite an intimidating bike. And it's one that is quite rightly dominated by that engine. Now, with all that tech on board, I was a bit worried that perhaps it would just feel a bit isolating I get to drive quite a lot of modern supercars, and they're very impressive, but they've got so much assistance technology on them now that you sometimes just feel like you're driving a computer game, not actually a fire-breathing car. So I'm quite reassured that as soon as you get on this bike, for all the kind of gizmos and gadgets and electronics, it feels like a motorbike, like a proper mechanical device. It feels quite angry, just the sound of it, as you can probably tell. And that's a relief, because when you buy a motorbike, particularly Ducati, you want to have that kind of emotional engagement with the machine, because that's, after all, what Italian brands do so well, isn't it? Make mechanical devices somehow emotional. Which brings us very neatly to that engine. And bloody hell, for want of a better word. I mean, a GS is gruntier for sure, but when you wind this thing out, oh, all of a sudden that sports bike heart really opens up, doesn't it? And it's a very, very different experience from a chuggy BMW. And all of a sudden I can begin to understand why the people who own these bikes and love them so much bang on about the fact that it's like you're getting two bikes in one. It's like you're getting a super bike and an adventure bike. And when you hear that noise, you can kind of understand that logic, can't you? And it's got it all as well. It pulls from low revs. It's obviously got some top end as well. And although, yeah, sure, that GS might be a bit more, shall we say, torquey and flexible, maybe yeah, just a bit more relaxed. The fact you've got that kind of anger in the top end of this as well. Again, it comes back to that thing, two bikes in one. And while this fog has cooled my boots a little bit, you can kind of appreciate the more adventure bike aspects of it. So yeah, you've got that beating heart of a sports bike, but I've got the comfort of a touring bike, the upright stance, the big panniers with their mysterious load, whatever that might be, heated grips, heated seat, and things like the tech integration is really slick as well. I rode that on the Transat recently, and that was kind of just the number of control on the handlebars was just completely baffling. But credit to Ducati, the interface through this little kind of joystick thing here, it's actually pretty straightforward. And I've got things like, through a couple of apps, I've got mapping and things like that as well. So for those long distance tours and all that kind of thing, I've got all that to support me as well. And then when the visibility improves and the road unwinds, now while I was buying that car there, I did switch to the sport mode, where I've already configured a kind of harder suspension setting, and it's really noticeable actually. You know, the electronic control on rebound and compression on front and rear, you can customise that according to the modes, and it's really impressive. To say that there's such a long travel suspension system, 200mm, the control in the bends, the support, it doesn't wallow under braking, it doesn't wobble around. Yeah, I mean, sure enough, in this kind of sportier mode it's feeling a bit more aggressive, a bit harder, but that kind of suits when you up the pace a bit and you want to kind of crack on, which this bike most definitely wants to do. Here's a very, very rapid motorcycle. But then you've got the comfort of having all those rider aids and things like that to support you when things do get a bit more challenging. So I think there's a kind of a nice blend between the electronic elements of the bike and the kind of the more traditional mechanical ones. I've got to say, as a first introduction to the Ducati world, this has me very impressed indeed. It just, everything feels so accomplished, whether it's the ergonomics, whether it's the incredible engine, whether it's the feel of the brakes. Everything just feels completely seamless. And of course the quality of the stuff, like the fit and the finish and all the kind of little detailing, even the mirrors. It is a quality piece of kit, as you'd bloody hope for 28 grand. Which brings me to that, if now, having ridden the Multistrada in what is undoubtedly its comfort zone out here on these sweeping roads, do I feel any more generously disposed to it? Would I, if I were spending that money on a glitzy motorbike, would it be one like this? It might be one with this engine, based on that. But as impressed as I am with the way it goes, the way it all hangs together, I still don't quite feel an emotional tug. But it's quite a long way to Scotland, so I best get some more miles in and see if I can find some love for the bike, as well as just being impressed by it. Alright, let's crack on. So there we go, we've made it to the shores of a slightly damp Loch Lomond after 300 miles of pretty epic riding, and kind of done it all really. I've done some kind of B-road scratching, done some big fast A roads, done some boring motorways, a bit of all sorts, and really you couldn't think of a better tool for the job than the Multistrada. I mean, the clue's in the name, isn't it? However you want to translate it, multi-street, multi-track, whatever it means, it does it. That's what the bike is all about, and it's just as comfortable doing all those things. And quite frankly, for doing a journey like that on a day like this, yeah, it really is, it makes total sense, doesn't it? It's also a much more charismatic bike than I expected. You know, it's got all the tech, very impressive, and it all works very well. There've been a couple of moments in the rain where, you know, I've been very glad of the electronic aids, and then they cut in really smoothly as well. So that's all really impressive. It's obviously beautifully made and finished. It's a big statement bike. The kind of supporting tech's pretty good as well. If I did have any criticism, it would be for the app-based navigation. It just seems a bit flaky. It picks some strange routes. Your phone has to be unlocked for it to run, and it keeps cutting out, and then you have to stop and reboot it again. You know, coming from cars, I'm used to using CarPlay or Android Auto, and they work really, really well. So I don't know why Ducati has gone with a kind of third-party navigation app in that sense. It would be a little bit annoying if you're out and run and had to keep stopping like that. That's one of those things, and it's one of those things that can be easily updated and improved as they go. More fundamentally, at the start I was saying, a couple of things I don't really like about adventure bikes: the look of them, the size, the weight, all those kind of things. While I've been really impressed with the way it rides out on the road, those criticisms, those issues for me have never really gone away. It still, looks are a subjective thing. You either love the way this bike looks or you don't. In terms of the size and weight, you can never really escape that. While it does kind of ride a lot better on the faster roads than you might expect for a machine of this size and weight, you can chuck it about like a sports bike in some situations. It's really, really impressive. But in more kind of everyday situations, moving it around, parking it, all that kind of stuff, it just always feels massive and really top heavy and a bit teetery. The idea of it falling over is just utterly terrifying, given how much it's worth and all that kind of thing. And I've never felt entirely comfortable with it. Now, that might be more down to me than the bike, because I've still not been riding for that long, and I guess the people who are buying bikes like this have probably been riding for a number of years. They've built up from smaller bikes and they've got to the point where they're totally comfortable with a bike this big and heavy. Perhaps I'm not there yet. So yeah, as I say, it might be down to me as much as the bike, but I think for that livability, it just would be a bit of an issue for me. I don't think I'd ever be able to get away from that. There is a lower seat option as well, and you can even get a low suspension option, which is another 600 and something quid. I think that brings the seat down to about 804 millimetres, which is pretty low for a bike this big. Doesn't make it any smaller or lighter, but it does at least open it up to those who are maybe short on a leg or whatever. So there are options, but I think fundamentally the looks, the weight, all that kind of thing, for me they just get in the way of enjoying the bike in a way that I have some others perhaps. So in that sense, no, I don't think my 28 grand would be going on a Multistrada V4 Rally. But if yours were, I would totally understand why. So it's been a really interesting day and I've learnt a lot, and I've been very, very impressed by the bike. I respect it, even if it's not for me. Anyway, I hope that all makes sense, and I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, do the usual thing, hit like, subscribe, plenty more videos coming up. And for now I'll say thanks for watching, goodbye, and ride safe. Oh, there was one more thing, wasn't there? I was going to find out what people actually carry in those giant aluminium boxes on the side of these things. Let's have a look.